Welcome to the ZINDERING podcast, episode 1. My name is Guy Livingston.
Zindering.
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 Nooit mag zijn weten.
On December 9th, I took the train from Holland to Belgium for a unique festival of music, words, and silence. Yeah, silence. Jelle Dirks is the director of the ZINDERING Festival in Mechelen, and he has invited me to make a special podcast presenting the performances and ideas of the festival, but seen from my own point of view. In the next 5 episodes, I will be the third eye, or actually I will be the third ear, listening and re-listening to the festival concerts and sharing them with you. We're starting with music of Henrik Goreski, sung by Doreen Mortelmans with Peter van der Velde on organ. The theme of the ZINDERING Festival is De Klank van Stilte, or the sound of silence. So why did they ask me, particularly, to make this podcast? Well, it's because I'm in the midst of a 4-year research project on stillness. I'm writing about silence, thinking about silence, and I'm making music about silence. I'm a concert pianist. I grew up in Tennessee, and now I live in The Hague. I love noisy music, but I think that silence is underrated and underappreciated. The Goreski performance took place in the dark, inside the Onze Lieve Vrouw over the Dijlkerk, which is a small cathedral in Mechelen, with a stunning ceiling of crisscrossed beams. We sat in the church, huddled in our coats, it was cold, while Doreen took us through a meditation, and then sang the powerful and poignant dissonances of the Polish composer Henrik Goreski. Here's Jelle Dirks.
Yeah, so the ceiling is kind of going on a travel throughout eons, throughout the universe, into the light. And that's why we start the festival in this church, because it's the only church if everything's dark. Normally you cannot be here at night, and you really have to put out all the lights. And because of the special windows and the lights from outside, there's traffic, the street lights, you have a very special motif on the ceiling, which evokes the whole Zindering idea of this festival. There are so many definitions of a meditation, but it can be a moment, being in the moment. That can already be a meditation. It sounds easy, but it is so difficult. That's a very complex question.
Today's theme is music behind the silence. It's kind of a paradoxical concept. Let's think about that. Is there anything behind the silence? Is there music? I've got 2 stories. The first takes place on the way to Belgium, on my way to the festival. My train was delayed and I got stuck in Breda. You know how when it gets so cold that everything gets really quiet, as if sound itself was starting to freeze. That's how it was on the deserted train platform, waiting for the train, And then in the distance, I heard piano music. I followed the sound along corridors and down staircases, and I found a grand piano in front of a closed Starbucks, with people chatting around it. An intrepid young man in a big, thick coat was playing Debussy for his friends. Eventually, my train did come, and I arrived in Mechelen just in time for the first concert. But alas, not in time to eat dinner. And so here's my second story. Later that night, after I'd heard Goreski and Strauss, I walked into a bar to sample the local beer, which was delicious. But of course, it was stronger than I expected, especially after missing dinner. So I was tipsy leaving the bar, and I forgot my tape recorder on the table. A rookie mistake. Very stupid. Later, as the curfew was starting, I realized my mistake, and I raced back to the bar, and that's where I met Veerle.
Veerle. It's like a good Flemish name. Yeah, I don't know how you would say it in English. Yeah, Veerle, yeah. When I worked in Germany, my colleagues, they called me Knopskaya because of my last name. So they thought I was looking Russian.
Veerle had found my recorder. She had also been at the Goreski concert, and it had made a big impression on both of us. Here's what she said.
And it really emerges from the silence, and you can get this real dense sound, and all of a sudden the organ gets denser and denser and denser, and then gets more lovely and denser and denser and denser, and then it stops. And the thing I liked the most, that was her hands being like half naked at the end, because she wore something black and red, and then she put her hands next to her body, and then you could really say, oh yeah, they stopped. Like, it was like a sign, like, now it's over. So that gave kind of a peace. So I think that's the thing about silence and about this festival. Even though you talk a lot, you're really active. You have this moment of silence, and you see the things that are behind the silence, because everything that was there, it really emerged. It went from the bottom really to the top. And I couldn't believe, like, yeah, and it's not like it's like they want to hide something, but there's something behind that not a lot of people can see it. It's not like, oh, I'm so spiritual, only me, I can see that because I see that people, or I don't care, whatever. But I think there's a kind of people that can feel those things.
So the topic of this episode, of this podcast, is actually Veerle's idea, that there is not silence behind the music, but rather that there could be music behind the silence. I love this way of, like, flipping the question, because normally we see it the other way around. So this it's a kind of switching, a kind of interchange of background with foreground. The cathedral in which we heard the Goreski was itself mysterious and dark and mystical. It contained its own silence. And the performers were both in front of and behind that silence. You might say that there are different ways to interpret the idea of music behind the silence. Of course. After all, silence is already ephemeral, it's intangible, it avoids description, it's deliberately slippery. Before going to the bar that night, I had been to a theater show with music by Strauss. The text, performed by Dirk Rofthoft, is from an epic poem by Tennyson. Here's the tale. Enoch Arden is a sailor who vanishes on a sea voyage, leaving his wife and children waiting back at home. Will he ever return? In this excerpt, the narrator tells of the silence of waiting, the worries, the crises, and then we hear the music behind the silence, a silence which has lasted 7 years.
Hij is niet meer, dacht Annie. Hij is zalig. En hij zingt. Hij zingt. Hosanna in den hoog. Hij zingt. Hosanna in den hoog.
His wife is alone, and she's asking, is he still there? Does he still exist? She doesn't know how to interpret the silence, because there is no sign, there is no meaning.
Ze liet hem komen en riep uit. Er is geen reden meer om niet te trouwen.
And here, behind the silence, is her version of Enoch, her vision of Enoch, singing his heart out.
Vrolijk luidden de klokken toen ze naar het altaar gingen.
Here's Maya Yanter, one of the performers from this multimedia
My
production.
name is Maya Yantar.
Yes? Tell me about what you were doing tonight on stage.
Tonight I was playing with image and sound.
Yes.
I had the lovely task to blend images together,
Yes.
to fuse them together, and then they were mixed with videos that I have recorded over time from my archive and soundscapes that I've created as well. So what we were trying to do is think about silence in a different way. You have the silence of the image. You have soundscapes that fade away, create silence. The spacing between the music, the white page, and my work was to blend nature images, so landscapes, the ocean, light, play with light, blending it together.
Een hele lange, smalle straat. De woorden in zijn gebroken hoofd. Als het refrein van een lied. Haar niet zeggen. Nooit mag zij het weten. Haar niet zeggen. Nee. Nooit mag zij het weten. Haar niet zeggen. Nooit mag zij het weten. Nee. Nooit.
Guy van Droma on piano, and Strauss's melodrama about a 10-year silence. Because when Arden finally returns, saved from the deserted island where his ship sank, he's too late. His wife has married his best friend. How's that for an ending? Well, actually, it's not the ending, because he resolves to keep his silence. And he doesn't tell her. He doesn't go to her. And his heart breaks. And so here's the third silence of the story. He dies. Well, that is the ultimate silence. You've been listening to ZINDERING, a podcast about music, silence, and stillness. Today's theme was the music behind the silence. At the beginning and end of the show, we heard Dorian Mertelmans and Peter van der Velde performing Henrik Goreski's O Domina Nostra, and in the middle we heard music of Strauss and words of Tennyson performed by Dirk Rofthoff, Guy van Droma, and Maya Yanter. The festival was directed by Guy Livingston and took place in Mechelen from December 9 to 13th, 2021. This podcast was produced by myself, Guy Livingston. Special thanks to Veerle de Knopper, Aletta Baker, and Colette Kinsella. Tune in next week for episode 2, How Loud is Silence?
Zindering.
Zindering.
Zindering.